Okay, so hello everybody, welcome to Blessedarch Lounge episode 2. Episode 1 we did with Viviano, and loads of you enjoyed the live unfiltered chat right here on the channel. So here we are back again. Blessedarch Lounge, because everything else that I do on the channel is pre recorded and then it's dissected into stories. But here I want to have a live unfiltered chat. So today, obviously, we have with us Professor Neil Leach. Let me give you guys a bit of an introduction about him. So, he's an architect and a theorist who has taught a number of institutions worldwide, including the AA in London, the Dessau Institute in Germany, and Columbia University. He's the author, editor, and translator of more than a dozen books, including Rethinking Architecture, The Anesthetics of Architecture, and Alberti's On Art of Building in 10 books. His current and future publications that are going to come out discuss the idea of artificial intelligence in architecture. It was, if you guys would have seen the video that we did together, which was the death of an architect, it was all based on his research. I saw his presentation, and I was really inspired by it, and so I had contacted him for that particular video. So, Neil, welcome back to the channel. It's great to have you here. Right, so today our discussion will be based around artificial intelligence in architecture. So, initially I just wanted to let's first talk about AI itself. Yeah, so let's talk about artificial intelligence in like in general. What how do you define it?
Yeah, well, I mean, um, so the traditional definition has been trying to make computers do the kind of things that human minds can do, right? That's been the, the definition given by people like Margaret Bowden. I think that's out of date now because I think AI can do things way beyond the capacity of the human mind. So maybe we could say AI is what tries to do things that human minds would also like to do. I think, but the bigger question often is where is AI? Because I think a lot of people mistakenly think that AI means a robot. Maybe they've been watching too many movies or something like that. AI's and particularly humanoid robots. That AI is not a humanoid robot. It might be what controls a robot, but it's not the robot itself. So no more than, let's say, a Tesla car is AI. But the key thing is where is it AI? And I think many people don't realize that we are completely surrounded by AI without knowing it's there. It's on our phones, for example. It's what's blocking our spam on our email. It's what's finishing off our sentences on Gmail. It's what's giving us recommendations on Spotify, on so on. It's what it recognizes our friends on Facebook, and it's what when we're driving. It's what tells us when we're straying out of lane and things like that. It's what controls our heating, our robots, our cleaners, and so on. It's everywhere around us, and we don't necessarily know it's there because AI is effectively invisible. If you want to really understand what AI is, think algorithms, not robots. Think algorithms, and then you begin to realize it's simply software, but it's very sophisticated software. The other thing I should say is that AI as a term has been around for over 50 years now. It was invented in 1956. A rather unfortunate term in many ways. I mean, why would you call it artificial and so on? But anyway, it was invented in 1956 and it's been around for quite some time. But the difference between what we have today in terms of AI and what they had all those years ago is incredible. It's a bit like comparing the very first car that was invented, something like the Model T Ford or something, with a Tesla today. I mean, the level at which it operates is really quite significant now. So these days we refer to what is called deep learning, which is the capacity for the computer to learn, and that's what allowed in that match that we spoke about, the AlphaGo match.
Yes.
Allowed AlphaGo to beat the human at Go. The game was so incredibly complex that you needed some special sort of system and technique. And so the shift from the first match that they played against Garry Kasparov in 1997 to the kind of things they were doing in 2016 is hugely significant. It's a complete change. So we have this very, very sophisticated form of AI called deep learning now, and that's the one that can translate so well and so on. And it's been facilitated by a number of different developments. I mean, the improvement in algorithms, of course, the use of the cloud so you can access GPUs, the the sheer kind of investment that's been going on into AI, and so on. It's really, there's been a revolution, which is hugely significant, and now we have a very very sophisticated form of AI that is literally everywhere in things that we do. But the key thing in my book is that because you can't see it, it's often we don't notice it. And I made this comment that it's as though the Earth has been invaded by a super intelligent, invisible alien species, and it's here, and it's all over the place. And sometimes, especially architects, don't realize that they're living in a world that is completely colonized by AI. This is very much the decade of AI. It's when it's really coming on stream and changing everything in our world, especially architecture itself.
And that definition was really important where initially you talked about different things that are already AI around us, because a lot of times when we think about it, we actually do think about robots. It goes to a dystopian future also, our vision, and that is, I think, mostly because of movies that we have this topic explored so much. But basically that is what we think about, but it is also in simple ways that it's already integrated within our lives. And I was just as you were saying that the last part, I don't know if you've read it, Inferno by Dan Brown. In that book there is this analogy that they talk about evolution and how mankind, when we came, we sort of dominated the entire landscape, and it predicted that another species will then dominate the landscape, and that species was humans mixed with technology, somehow getting fused and becoming something new altogether, a new kind of species that might change the landscape, how we see it. So understanding artificial intelligence, let's talk a little bit about its effect in architecture.
Well, maybe first I just pick up on that comment in Dan Brown. I think that is the point right now, is that often people sort of contrast AI with humans, and there is a significant difference, because AI is not conscious, it's not aware of what it's doing. It might beat us at chess or Go, it doesn't know it's doing it. But rather than contrasting it, for the moment at any rate, we need to think about it as a form of kind of prosthesis, a kind of extension of the human capacity. So they talk about extended intelligence or intelligence augmentation in terms of how we operate today, and it's something unique to human beings, that we have a very what they call plastic mind, plastic brain, that we're able to adapt to these technologies and absorb them and take them on board, so we think through them in a way. And that's, I think, the most significant thing to think about today. And so it becomes a kind of form of augmentation to the human being. I think that Elon Musk has got this kind of comment he makes, that he says that we are all already superhuman because an extension of ourselves in the form of our cell phone. So
yeah, I was watching an Elon Musk full-length interview the other day, and he was talking about artificial intelligence a lot. And again, he was, just as you do, he was talking about like, it is inevitable, it will come. And he also said, yes, what the same conclusion that you came to, that yes, a lot of jobs will change, a lot of jobs will go, because a lot of tasks that we do during the day, throughout the day, different things that we do around the world will be taken over by AI, and it will become an integral part of our lives. I also wanted to touch upon that point of, you said the difference there between human and AI is AI is not conscious at the moment. Do you think it will also reach a point where it becomes autonomous and conscious, or would that depend on our programming?
That's a good question. It certainly is going to reach the stage it becomes increasingly capable. Certainly in architecture, I think the idea of it simply being an extension to humans, at one point, it's going to be able to do things as well as we can. Whether or not it needs to be conscious to do that is another question. I think that you don't need to have your self-driving cars as conscious, and maybe in fact human beings are more dangerous because they're conscious and they can be distracted when they're driving. That's one of the kind of comments that's been made about that, to how effect it'll have. So it doesn't necessarily have to be conscious, I don't think. And I don't think also that consciousness is necessarily a product of greater computation. But what we're discovering is that AI is becoming so capable these days that it's appearing to be conscious, but it's not. But I don't think necessarily we need to worry too much about that. I don't think we need consciousness, frankly. The systems that are now generating.
That is one of the things that people fear. We might not need it.
Yeah. Well, okay. So the question of fear, I think you're right. You just look at the movies, right, and the number of times where you get terrified by technology. It's a kind of famous thing in movies. I think they put it in to make people watch movies. But from let's say Metropolis onwards, there was this famous robot Maria that becomes terrifying. And you see also HAL in 2001: A Space Odyssey that kind of turns on humans. You see Ava and Ex Machina. You see I guess the alien life forms that you have in Blade Runner, the replicants. So there's always this kind of people sort of prey on your fear of robots, and they always, in the movies, they're always portrayed as turning against us. But I think the point is that they're there at the moment. They're there very much to help us. They certainly help us in our everyday lives right now. And I think what I would say about they're simply a tool. It's a question of how you use them, or who uses them, and how and why. So you could have an ordinary kitchen knife, and that could be used as a murder weapon, or you could just use it to slice up your vegetables. And I think the kind of the fear sort of tends to sort of focus on the potentially dark side of things. But a facial recognition, for example, which of course in the wrong society could be used as a way of controlling people's behavior. Sure. That's what I use to open up my cell phone, and it's extremely useful. It saves me time. So there's nothing inherently evil, I don't think, in any particular technology. It's just simply the question of who uses it and why and how. So we can't blame the technology. It's not necessarily that bad at all. In fact, it's frankly, I think it's going to be extremely useful up to a certain point.
Yeah. All right. Let's come to discussing AI in architecture. You also touched upon the fact that again it might take over, but we also talked a little bit about does the AI even need to be conscious to design architecture? So let's talk about AI in architecture in general, and then also circle back to that topic.
So about architecture in general.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So what's happening right now, I think, is people are racing ahead in developing these tools for architecture. And I think the point that's often made about technology, when I say racing ahead, the change is exponential. There was a theory called Moore's Law, which probably doesn't hold anymore. We said basically every 2 years everything goes down in halves in price and doubles in terms of its capacity. So if you're thinking exponential, you're going 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, and not 1, 2, 3, 4. Hence the speed of change really is quite kind of shocking. And certainly, I've just published my second book, and both books were out of date by the time they were published because of the speed of change, and all the stuff that we have now is just astonishing. So we're in a moment of really extreme change. I think this is the AI decade. I think by the end of the decade, we are going to find ourselves in a very, very different world. What we're looking at here is one of the early experimentations that's been produced by Kurt Himmelblau called Deep Himmelblau. And Deep Himmelblau is a kind of, it's basically drawing upon the resources of the office, and it's kind of, in a sense, regurgitating or reconfiguring and imagining how you might sort of combine those elements in new ways. And this is probably the state of the art, we should say, in terms of architecture. There's a guy called Daniel Bolojan who's been behind it, and it's really something that's quite significant. So they're even using that now to automate, as it were, the design process. So you draw upon the kind of work that you've been doing on the past, and you interpolate this, and you bring out new possibilities. This is, I think, it's called cycle GANs. There are ways in which you can use not the data and crossbreed it, as it were, with other data. So you can open up a range of what you're doing. But this is, I think, this won the Acadia Prize last year. It won the Digital Futures Prize, and it's probably the state of the art in terms of where we are in terms of generating AI. So this is the kind of thing that has been done my students have all been using these. They're actually, the term that's used for this kind of software is GANs, Generative Adversarial Networks, and it's a way of hallucinating, shall we say, images on the computer, and they tend to come as a kind of latent spacewalk. Hence, you get these videos, and you basically could freeze at any particular time and use that. It's essentially a two-dimensional image at the moment rather than three-dimensional, but it's still quite, it's exciting. This is the work of Edward Hyman that called Infinity Skyscraper that we put in the recent edition of AD, Machine Hallucinations, Architecture and AI, that was published in the UK on Friday of last week, so really, really recent. It's more up to date than my first book in terms of the images, but both of those books are going to be rendered obsolete fairly soon. What I would say with this particular one is a combination of AI and other techniques. Often there's a kind of form of creative engagement with AI, whereby you open up by using AI alongside other softwares. So we're getting to the point where, certainly my students are absolutely fascinated by this world. It's their world. They're the kids who have kind of been brought up with AI. They're the ones whose future is going to really depend on AI. And whenever I ask them to write about digital anything, they 80-90% write about AI. But maybe that's because I live in a particular kind of bubble. In southern Florida, we also have Daniel Bolajan. We have a lot of people who work in that area. I'm based in Los Angeles, where some of the most radical work has come out, where Google, Artists and Machine Intelligence are based. And I'm also part of Digital Futures, where we've been really pushing AI because it's such a kind of unpopular tool. Every summer we have workshops, and I think last time we had over 20 free workshops for people to go and find out about those things. So I'm completely immersed in that sort of world, and it's maybe I'm in a bubble because I find out that very few people in architecture actually really know what AI means and how they're going to use it, which is quite surprising because the information's all out there and other people are very much aware of it.
Yeah. It was new for me as well. When I saw your presentation, I did not think about it at all before. I knew about AI separately. I knew it like potential uses, but I never sort of connected it to the degree that you helped me see it in your presentation.
I think, but the point is, it's very, very new. The kind of work we can do now has only been possible for the last 2 or 3 years. I look back at 2019. We were speculating about whether you could hallucinate buildings, and then Refik Anadol did that and produced, worked on Zaha's the data from Zaha's office and produced the first ever version, which I used in the front cover of my first book. So it's relatively recent, and I recall back in 2019 we made a proposal to curate the British Pavilion at the Venice Biennale. And teaming up with Google, who are the world leaders, and with Zaha Hadid Architects, who are one of the greatest firms of architects, and also Refik Anadol, and we didn't get anywhere in the competition. But I think people now realise that it's suddenly become a really hot topic, and things have changed very differently. So the kind of reception that the AD has had in the last few days has been astonishing. People really want to find out about this because it's something that is not only a useful tool and an exciting tool. I think one of the things I'd say is that as an academic, my first job was in the 90s back in the UK when we had deconstruction. Decon was all the rage, and we had alongside that, some really interesting theoretical discussions about Jacques Derrida, Gilles Deleuze, and so on. That's exactly what's happening again now. We're getting a new kind of creative impulse, a new series of things that are coming out that are changing the landscape of architecture in terms of the language, and but also firing up new theoretical ideas. We've got a kind of intersection between neuroscience and AI specialists producing some really interesting theoretical ideas about what's happening in the mind and so on. And the theory is that our minds are kind of hallucinating. We're at a very interesting stage when all of a sudden all these ideas are coming together, and we have something radically new. When that begins to permeate architecture, I don't know, because I think that architects are incredibly conservative.
Very.
If I look at the top 10 bestsellers, in terms of books, you can find Vitruvius right up there, and you think, well, why are people still reading Vitruvius? But it's going to hit, and people eventually will begin to realize my God, this is changing my world completely, and it will, and it will. And in fact, it already is. We just don't notice it. Perhaps that's the point I would make.
You know, in the title of the video, "The Death of the Architect," and that is also the title of your upcoming book. You know, when we say the death of the architect and how AI will basically how what we talked about in the video was how AI will take over the job, and we wouldn't need architects as much because the AI will be able to do a much better job. But then, you know, there was a comment that came on that video that I wanted to discuss with you, which said that, you know, when we are saying that, we are talking about designing, right? Designing is currently for a lot of people only 30% of the job of being an architect. 70% of that is getting it built, getting it done, just communicating with everybody involved and getting the projects made. So, you know, would that definition still stand? Like, it will lead to the death of an architect, or will it just shift us to people who get things constructed?
Well, that's a good question. Maybe I should say the history behind that title, Death of the Architect, was I was originally commissioned by the RIBA, the British Institute of Architects, to look at the impact of AI on architecture, and I thought about this for a long time, and I thought, well, I think the title should be The Death of the Architect, but my editor at RIBA Publishing was not very happy about that. She thought maybe most of the RIBA members would not be happy to know their profession is going to be impacted. So anyway, in the end, I shifted it to a different publishing house so I could be more free, as it were. But I found myself sort of writing this thing in a way that the AI was both. I mean, I feel like Elon Musk, right? Because Elon Musk is using it the whole time in Tesla cars and SpaceX and Neuralink and so on. And he's doing some incredible things with it. At the same time, he's warning that maybe it's going to be the end of civilization and so on. Yeah. So I felt sort of compromised. So in the end, I ended up deciding to, and I managed to persuade my publishers, Bloomsbury, to produce two books. One with a white cover, which is a kind of like an angel, as it were, about how amazing and how what AI is going to how it's going to help us as architects. And then one with a black cover, which is going to be like the devil, you know, but how it is also going to have an impact on work. And I guess, I mean, in terms of the black cover book, it's not just AI, right? I think that architects are struggling already. I mean, that's fairly clear. You know, only 5% of buildings are being designed by architects, and increasingly the architect's not in charge. I mean, way back when I translated Alberti, and his definition of the architect as the person who was in charge of the building site and so on, that's gone. You know, he was talking about how the labourer or the work person was just a tool in the hand of the architect. Well, now the architect is no longer in charge. Most architects in the UK are working for developers on design-build contracts. So instead of the workman being a tool in the hand of the architect is a tool in the hand of the developer. So already the position of the architect has been compromised in many ways. And I think that there's a whole series of different sort of issues about why you could look at the profession itself as being threatened. So it's not going to be AI on its own that's going to bring about an end to the architect. And I'll say also that not all architects are going to completely go. It's a bit of an exaggeration. I was trying to get my point across to, you know, and to startle people into thinking about these things, but not all architects are going to go. But already we're seeing that technologies can reduce the number of people. Technology can reduce the number of people in an office. Patrick Schumacher was telling me that Zaha Hadid architects, they no longer need so many people on certain tasks, you know, and you can automate them in certain ways, you know, and that's going to be increasingly what is going to happen. Wang Yu He, who was from XCool, who was one of the leaders in developing this software, has pointed out that basically one person with AI can do the same amount of work as 5 people without AI. So already that would suggest that the size of offices is going to come down. I still think that there will be, you know, there'll be the role for the personal touch. We don't need we won't need anyway in the future the personal touch that we have at the moment. But there will be the role for like having a kind of personal trainer. You can pay extra, you know. The comparison I would make actually is maybe with let's say an Uber car, because in the future, if you think about it, when Uber cars become self-driving, you just simply don't need a driver. When you use a destination already, you already told the car where it's going to go. So what does a driver do? I mean, the driver kind of opens a door for you and has a conversation with you and so on. But once things are self-driving, you know, we don't need a driver. And the same will happen with architecture. Once architecture is completely able autonomously to generate architectural designs, we won't need architects. I mean, of course, it'd be nice to have an architect, nice to kind of chat to an architect, but it's going to make it more expensive. So I think costs are going to kind of push things down, and we're going to find ourselves increasingly marginalized. But that's not to say that we'll be necessarily out of a job, because I think, if we can draw upon the kind of, on what I would call the architectural imagination to rethink exactly what we're doing, then the other possibilities will open up. And exactly what you're doing, Rishabh, exactly. That is an example, I think, of the architectural imagination, thinking through systems and trying to find new ways of operating and opening up in new ways. And so when I think about the architect of the future, I'm not necessarily thinking about somebody who's going to make the new style of architecture, the new aesthetic or something like that. I'm thinking of someone who might be able to harness informational systems and use those in an incredibly creative way to open up new possibilities. So, I mean, for example, TED Talks were apparently invented by an architect, and digital futures was something that I imagined and as a possibility. So if we sort of shift it towards how we can deploy that architectural imagination in other arenas and think less about putting bricks on bricks, then we might be able to see opportunities for how we can open up. And I would say one thing, I think that the architectural training is very marketable. I mean, there are very few people, other professions out there, where they can do what architects do. They can design, they can think three-dimensionally, they can understand material behavior.
Yeah.
Architects actually have got a kind of very marketable set of skills, and we often see architects shifting into what I would call other architectures, for example, the space industry or Hollywood and so on, even 3D printing food and so on. There are many examples, especially here in LA, of architects who are reinventing what the notion of the architect is, and I think that's what we have to do. We have to reinvent. We have to think about our future.
But do you think what we see as architecture today and who we call as an architect today, the job, that would change in the future? You're sure that would happen?
Oh, we have to adapt to survive for sure. So we're going to have to change what we do. Otherwise, we go extinct, And I think that I will say though that architects on the whole are quite conservative. As I mentioned about Vitruvius, and they're convinced that we're going to carry on. But when I was a student, when I was your age, Rishabh, I was a student in Cambridge, right? And I would go on holiday somewhere, and I would go to a travel agent, and I would queue up and wait my time, and then I would talk to the travel agent, and we'd fix up a flight, and then he would post the ticket to me in the mail the next day, and then I would go to a camera shop and I would buy a roll of films, and then I'd go off on holiday somewhere, and I would come back and I would take my films to be developed, and so on. If you think about it, all those trades have almost completely gone. I mean, there are travel agents, but not as many as there were in the past. You certainly don't post tickets by mail. You send them as email attachments. A lot of camera shops have gone out of business because of cell phones these days, because cell phones are just as good. And you certainly don't get your films developed because you use digital photography. So and you think that all things are going to be around forever, but a whole bunch of things that have that were there have just disappeared. And the problem is, and I think the architects are guilty of this, is that we can only imagine a future that is based on our present sort of world. I always think that kind of like the Henry Ford sort of comment, if I were to ask people what they wanted, they'd say faster horses, and I think architects are still locked into that faster horses mentality right now. But of course the car came along, and what happened with the car is that a whole bunch of horses became unemployed because you don't need them anymore. And eventually with the self-driving car, a whole bunch of drivers, of taxi drivers, will potentially become unemployed. So it's important to try and sort of, to use that imagination to imagine a future, to design a future, not a building so much, but a future, and in which we play a role. And the world will be different. There might not be so much work around, but there certainly will be opportunities. And that's where I think that architects should be moving in, and especially using these technologies and seeing what we can do. So that's the challenge, and that's why I think your operation is really quite impressive, apart from the fact that you probably show most academics how they should be teaching and lecturing in a more dynamic way. You've seen the possibility of harnessing this in an interesting kind of way. let me just say one final thought is that, the term architect has also been used for computer science these days. In fact, very soon when you Google the word architect, you're going to find more references to computer science than architecture.
You still do. Like in a lot of ways, you still do.
So, but I think the future is going to be one in which the technology is going to be, as you say, kind of very much harnessed and linked into human beings. And once we start to sort of, as I mentioned, human beings are really naturally adaptive creatures. We start thinking through our tools, then you can imagine all sorts of things in the future. But I think the most important thing is to get architects, and especially architectural professors, to think about the future. I mean, the real danger we have in academia is that, frankly, there are a bunch of dinosaurs out there. There are architects, there are professors who trained, they studied Le Corbusier 30 years ago, and they're still kind of spouting the same stuff. The world is changing, and I think that academia has got to change with it. There's a story that I once heard about a professor who used to be extremely popular when he was first teaching, and the auditorium was absolutely packed out with students. And towards the end of his career, there were just a few sad people in the front row, about 6 people. And he said, I don't understand what's happening. I'm teaching exactly the same lectures I did 30 years ago. I think the point is we have to adapt and change in order to survive. Otherwise, we will go the way of the dinosaurs. We have to really think imaginative about the future.
I do want to discuss on that further. I would just like to tell everybody who's sort of listening, I'm reading the comments that are coming in, and in a few moments we're going to open up the conversation to you guys as well for all of your questions. But yeah, keep commenting, keep putting in your questions, and we will come to that in just a few moments. One of the things that I want to discuss with you is the fact that so after the video came out, you had sort of texted me and sort of told me what part of the video you disagreed with, and that was especially towards the end, the message that I put where I said that it would be years and years away, where it would go, where we would completely, where AI would be more than humans in the profession of architecture. Let's just say that. So why do you say that?
Well, I say that partly because I know the people who are working in the area. I mean, one of my doctoral candidates on the D-Days at Florida International University is someone called Wan Yu He, who runs XCool. She used to work for OMA, hence the name XCool, XCoolhouse, and she's got like 200 people or more working on software right now. And you can just see here, this is an example of the kind of work that they're producing now. They're beginning to use this technology in a way that this is actually a competition. Now, there's a competition in which they beat 200 architects. And we're going to look at this image is really quite interesting because it's looking at how you can use topological optimization based on environmental control systems to break down what was originally a rectilinear form into more kind of Gehry-like forms. And what you're finding is that we are harnessing this technology to produce efficient structures that really make a lot of sense. And when you get to the point that someone is producing this technology and is winning a competition with 200 against 200 other architects, you can see that all of a sudden it's having an impact. So this is just one of the examples. And here are these kind of Gehry-like forms that are emerging out of the computer. And I think what I think clients like is that this is actually giving them a very optimized version of their buildings. Clients want to get the most out of their site, and if their architects can use AI and produce something that is way more efficient, that's giving them more potential in terms of their building, then that's going to be a game changer. And I think one of the observations that I came up with in terms of my research was the fact that clients were beginning to insist that architects use AI as a way of just checking things. We use spell check to go and check our spelling and so on. And when you can use this kind of technology to produce something that is that goes beyond humans, then you're in a situation when you kind of pay attention. Now, it's going to take something before we actually this really sinks home. And typically, what's been happening in terms of the world outside, shall we say, is that it's when AI takes on the world chess champion Garry Kasparov and thrashes him. That happened in 1997. Then the AlphaGo match in 2016. Then people pay up and stand up and sit up and pay attention. I think AlphaGo had a huge shock on especially not in the West, but in Go playing countries. They thought, I can't believe this. And in fact, none of those matches did anyone predict the AI was going to win. And it was really a wake-up call for those countries when it did. In fact, in China, they had what they call the Sputnik Moment. Sputnik Moment was a wake-up call for the Americans when the Russians sent a satellite into space, I think in 1997 or something like that. No, sorry, 1957, somewhere around then. And that's what led to the foundation of NASA. And what happened after AlphaGo is that, that basically all these nations started to invest in AI because they realized that, it was going to be a complete game changer. Now, the problem is with architects is they're a bit like, we are a bit like, the world of chess or the world of Go. We can't imagine that AI is going to be better than us. We can't even think that way, but it's going to become extremely clear that that's going to happen. We noticed in the AlphaGo match that there was this famous move 37 that everyone thought was a glitch, it was a mistake, but 100 moves later, we began to realize that actually it was operating at a level we couldn't understand. We simply couldn't grasp.
Yeah.
There's a kind of a theory that the dumb don't know how dumb they are. I would say that the intelligent don't know how dumb they are, and sometimes even the creative don't know how uncreative they are. So we are going to be shocked and surprised by this world when it opens up new possibilities that we simply hadn't imagined. So what I'm waiting for really is, maybe there are going to be two moments. The first one I think is going to be when suddenly AI produces a project that beats Zaha or beats whoever. And that's already happened. In fact, one of the other projects by XCool, they beat MTRDV. They were second, I think, behind Kengo Kuma and Snowhetta. Well, it's not going to be long before they're going to be ahead of that, And I think that's going to be something that's going to be a wake-up call when suddenly people realize that AI can produce better designs than architects can. But I think the other one's going to be, frankly, the question of the client. The clients are going to be insisting on architects, and it's going to be more pervasive. Already it's happening, but it's going to become more pervasive. They're going to insist that architects use AI to guarantee their return on investment. And I think that's going to become a crucial thing. So we're going to see a kind of landscape that's going to be gradually, incrementally changing in terms of maybe what the clients are expecting. But in terms of architects, there's going to be a sudden shock when suddenly we think, holy shit, this thing can do better than we can. We simply can't imagine that things are going to be
thinking faster horses, and what might come up is a car.
Exactly. No, that's exactly the analogy that we need to think about. So let's just see. But the writing's on the wall in many ways, and I'm struck by how architects are still kind of in their own cocoon. They're not really thinking about what's happening. And I'm surprised by there's so many books out there that have been bestsellers who are talking about how automation is going to change everything and so on and so on. And the only book that I found about architecture, about the future, it was a book, I think it was The Future of Architecture in 100 Buildings, as though there might be a design by, I don't know, who knows, Thomas Heatherwick that's going to be really influential and other people are going to copy it and so on. It's not going to be about that. The nature of the game itself is going to completely change. Now, so I've been watching these things, and I would say that one of the things that XCool are planning in the future is to do away with BIM. We accept BIM and we think it's probably very progressive, but actually the problem right now, I mean, I think you interviewed Mariana, I think from Zaha's office, right?
Yeah.
If you think about Zaha's office, what happens is that someone like her, she's doing something on Maya and doing these beautiful, exquisite projects that then they put onto Rhino, and then they kind of go into I don't know, when they go into some form of BIM, I think digital project, what they used to have, and so on. And maybe there's even a fourth sort of version. So there are 4 different modeling system softwares being used. What they're talking about in terms of XCool is just having one platform. They're calling it ABC, and you go from data to building. So and we can't imagine that. We sort of you can't imagine a future not like your past.
This is one of the primary reasons why I was saying it was years and years away, is where you are also talking simultaneously about doing away with BIM. I feel like in India, BIM is just starting up. Like more and more people are starting to adopt it. I see offices around me across the country, and because it's a field majorly dominated by smaller offices, you see in a lot of places, as you said, there are not just, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but they're not just dinosaurs in the education system. They're also like within the practice, and that is because we use tools, we use methods, we use different things that, one, we've been using for a long time. Two, these are the tools that people understand. These are the tools that you can easily communicate with to even people who are non-architects. And that is why I had that statement of why I think it's years and years away. It might not be years and years away for the West. I genuinely think, for it to trickle down to the rest of the world in a massive way would just take a lot of time.
Yeah, well, firstly, I'd say that actually these tools are not necessarily more complicated. In fact, the way we're moving in terms of think about a cell phone, the kind of swiping or the facial recognition on a cell phone, the technology makes this easier. And now I think there are going to be two types of architects in the future. There's going to be what Randy Deutsch calls super users, those who really know how to customize the AI to get under the hood and go and look at things and so on. There's going to be that, but also, it's going to be very easy for anyone to use it. I mean, like anything, like ordering an Uber or something like that. All these technologies also already have AI. It's going to be like that. So it's going to be very, 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 very easy to use. So for sure that's going to happen. And I would say, of course, that the picture itself is going to be varied. I think that probably what's going to be happening in places like London and New York is going to be different to clearly to other countries to begin with. And we're talking about the most technologically advanced countries, but no, I think it's inevitably going to have some impact. It's definitely going to change the nature in which we operate. But it's really trying to jolt architects into really thinking about this kind of new world and to try and change our mindset, because we need to. So really, that's what my book, The Death of the Architect, is, a kind of wake up call and say, listen, this is on the horizon. It's not only on the horizon; it's already here, and it's going to be changing things. And let's not assume that we're going to be around forever because of we have their architects here at the moment.
Yeah, we'll discuss one last thing, and after that we'll open it up to questions. So people, please do start sending in your questions, and other comments that you'd want us to discuss. I think let's just hit upon education one last time. Is the fact that, again, I genuinely believe, even without teaching anybody AI, the architectural education is still it's years behind what the field is right now. It is so far away. We still study tools, technologies, materials that are not even used anymore, that might just be used in remotest areas where you might not have access to the other materials. We study so many things, and even I also talk about the fact that in India a B.Arch degree itself is 5 years long. We study so many things, a lot of them not useful. When you go out in the field, because you don't have an experience as an architect, you basically told, now you need to start learning how it actually works in the real field. So in this scenario where the field is already like leagues behind, and we are then talking about these newer technologies, how do you think this landscape will change, and will institutions finally catch up in a way to the field?
Yeah, you're touching on a big subject here, right? First of all, I was the one behind Digital Futures going online, and that part of the aim of that is to try and really, again, give students of architecture the kind of information they need to have, and I think that so we provide all these free tutorials and free workshops and free lectures and things, because frankly some people around the world just don't get that kind of material.
They don't have access to it.
Yeah, Philippe Morel once made a comment. He said, what we're doing in Digital Futures is doing to education what the Uber cars did to the taxi service. I mean, the taxis were so old-fashioned and out of date, they were forced to kind of improve their act because of what was happening. So, Philippe was talking about French education. He was saying that it's a disaster zone. All these kind of professors completely out of touch. So, I think that's one thing, that in the sense of just being able to use a digital platform to try and convey information, that's an important thing in itself. But when you think about education, it's actually, the model that we've been using is incredibly old-fashioned. The idea that, that a professor every year would kind of like give the same lecture that was given the year before, that's completely absurd. I mean, absolutely absurd. I'm currently doing all my lectures online, and they're being pre-recorded, like your things. Maybe in the future Rishabh's sort of videos will be part of an educational thing, you know.
People
And I
tell
think
me
we
that
have to-
they are for a lot of people. Like people play my videos sometimes in classrooms for like certain aspects.
You know, I think that's exactly what TED Talks are doing. You know, and frankly, if you think about it, there is more information out there on YouTube than any professor would know. So why do we? I think what a professor is basically is more a kind of somebody who's stimulating curiosity these days and pointing people to the right TED Talks and things, rather than being the person who has this knowledge inside their brain that's just kind of being delivered to the students. I mean, it's not that anymore. There's a different sort of way of operating. And then one of the other things we're doing on digital futures is a thing called the Doctoral Consortium, where we're focusing especially on PhD or doctoral candidates around the world, because typically they're operating in small groups, maybe one or two of them and so on. So we provide one single platform, everyone can come together and can discuss things. All of a sudden it becomes, opens up the possibilities of what it could be. And not only that, but you can bring in the very best professor in the world to come and teach that. So maybe a course of 12 lectures, so you could have 12 different professors around the world, and they do all the teaching, shall we say. So, I think education really needs to wake up to all this, because, I mean, there are new ways of operating, a bit like the way that you operate, Rishabh, and I think that's what education needs to do, to really radically think that, and so it's education which is the crucial thing right now, is not least because that generation that is, currently about to graduate, that's what shall we say, they're the ones who are going to be facing the singularity, or whatever we call it, that moment when all of a sudden AI changes the name of the game. And we've got to be ready, we've got to hit the ground running, we've got to be prepared for that, and we've got to radically rethink a lot of things. So, it's what I find strange about architects is they always are looking backwards instead of looking forwards. It's like the Vitruvius story. I mean, if you look at schools of architecture, there are plenty of courses on the history of architecture. I mean, and I used to do some of them, right? I used to teach about Alberti and so on. But very few looking at the future. Very few. I mean, I think Liam Young at SciArc, whom I've known for years when he was at the AA, he's always speculating about the future. And I think we need to reorientate ourselves towards the future, and maybe in a slightly science fiction way, imagining possible futures, because when it comes to it, when you think about it, some of those movies, science fiction movies, have become a reality, and yet we as architects don't really think in that sort of way. I don't know, Blade Runner was a recent one, right? I mean, that was so prescient in many ways.
Is live again. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
All right. So now let's open up, to talk about people's comments, people's questions. I think a lot of people in the comments might just be a little demoralized by what we are discussing about the future of architecture. I think there's somebody who is sorry, the exact comment is sort of just putting algorithms should be enough to save us. Wow. I think so. The people when you talk about AI and how it would replace architects, people genuinely think, how can an algorithm, replace what architects do, what they do for a project, how they bring a project? Because in architecture, we talk a lot about, designing spaces that are human-centric, designing with a feeling, designing in ways that I know we feel our intellect leads us to ways that just makes beautiful and human-centric designs, and people often get offended by this statement that AI might take over, is the fact that they think that you're saying humans do not add value to architecture in that sense.
I mean, what is human-centric? I mean, we might think we're being human-centric, right? I mean, but whatever it is, you can predict it. You can just take the data of the past and produce it again. I mean, I don't see that it's the property of the kind of the emotional investment that architects put into the process that's going to make any difference. Frankly, we're already discovering that it's able to come up with better designs. So there's kind of like a nostalgia there. I'm not quite sure why. I mean, but it goes back to my mind to the horses, the faster horses.
But also going back to that. So if the AI is learning from the past, learning from the data that it already has, and then creating newer things, would there be a point where it would be saturated and not create something new, but just be recycling the old, not breaking the norm at any point?
Well, okay. I mean, that depends on the system that you're using. But let me just say, I guess what we've discovered already is that AI is able to come up with solutions, urban solutions, and this has been came out of a conversation I had with the guys at Spacemaker AI. They were bought up by Autodesk for 240 million, as we mentioned before. Autodesk can see that's where it's going, right? And it was coming up with solutions that no architect had thought about. And that became a shock. And it, effectively the same as Move 37. That was happening in architecture. And I think if you look at architecture in terms of two different sets of operations, I think urban planning is kind of interesting kind of concept, because you've got urban planners who are kind of operating at the very beginning of a proposal for a city, and they're kind of policymakers, politicians, no architects. Maybe if there's anyone designing at all, it's probably the civil engineers designing the road infrastructure. That's the basic thing. And then we have urban designers who are concerned about the aesthetics and making it look good and so on and so on. The design as such, that's where we tend to operate, and therefore we're slightly marginalized from the whole process, right? But if you think about that first point, the kind of the whole logistics, the strategic planning, that's exactly what AI is really good at, especially with urban situations where the information is so complex that we can't even get our head around it. So that area is already clearly something that AI is ahead of. And when you think about what the other side of things, already AI algorithms are able to pick up on what news we like. It's able to pick up on what music we like in Spotify, what movies we like, what books we like on Amazon. It's already predicting, or he knows what our taste is, and soon it'll be able to to obviously understand what architecture we like and produce buildings accordingly. So I think there are a number of different sort of ways that where it's going to clearly has that capacity to potentially take over the role. But so I think that that we have to be aware of all those things. And also I think one thing I'd say is, architects, are we always quite as imaginative as we think we are? I mean, if there is a canon of architecture, you've got to keep fairly close to the canon, right? So if you were to design I always say a pineapple, in a studio review, you'd probably get failed, right? But if you do a building a little bit like Zaha or Rem Koolhaas or Herzog and Moore and whatever, but not the same, but a little bit like that, then you get a good grade. And so we're quite conformist. We keep to existing sort of models, and I think everybody themselves, they have their certain sort of habits and ways of doing things. That's why I think that Gmail is so good at predicting what the end of the sentence is going to be, because it already knows how we normally finish a sentence. So I always think that in a way, human beings in the end they become a bit like sort of pieces on a chessboard. They only move in certain sort of ways because that's their habit. We all have our signatures. We not just physical signatures, but actually the way we walk, the way we talk, we're idiosyncratic. So we're actually quite predictable, and that's where AI would come in and be able to predict. So I think that
that's how AlphaGo also defeated the Sedol. It's also about predicting what the other person would play.
Yeah, and of course there are moments in the history of architecture when they're complete game changers, right? When architects bring in something radically new. Like, think of, for example, Frank Gehry's Guggenheim and Bilbao. That was really a game changer. But then Frank Gehry starts copying that in his or doing versions of that in his later work. I mean, The Walt Disney Concert Hall in LA is very similar to the Guggenheim in Bilbao. So the idea that somehow architects are really fired, their imagination is fired up and they're coming up with new things the whole time, I think we're entirely predictable. And that's, I think, what AI will be able to kind of lock into.
Somebody had also asked about, so I'll read out the entire comment, but I'll rephrase the sort of question. And it says, can we train AI systems to design spaces on varying gravity and oxygen levels? Long story short, enclosures in outer space. I would like to rather change it to say that, with this, when we are going towards space, when we are thinking of space exploration as a civilization, do you think AI will be a big part of designing the habitat in outer space?
Well, I mean, maybe you don't realize, but I edited an architectural design issue on space architecture because I worked for NASA a number of projects. So it's an area that I certainly used to know about. I think I'm out of touch now, but yeah. So first of all, let me just say one thing: is that AI is already being used there. I mean, when they land a lander on Mars, it's basically it is being controlled by AI because the signals take too long. You can't do it directly, so it's got to be independent as well, autonomous. So AI is being used already in that area. As it happens, I mean, we mentioned Wang Yu earlier on. She's actually doing her doctorate is based on that and testing out systems using the metaverse or using the kind of this virtual world to run scenarios and test out possibilities. And of course, you just change the calibration. I mean, if the gravity on the moon is 1/6 that on Earth, then you can change the calibration and so on. It's simply just a sort of system that you can use. So absolutely, of course, it's going to be used there, and it is already used there. I mean, I don't know much about SpaceX, but I'm absolutely convinced that that AI is
for
central.
Sure. Elon Musk is there for sure. They're using AI, yeah.
And planes these days, planes are landing autonomously. So it's already here. So it's not as though it might be a possibility. Of course, it's going to be a possibility. Probability.
All right. We just have a few more.
What's the other one? Sorry, the other part of the question you said not about space, but you shifted that last question.
So the question itself was, can we train AI systems to design spaces on varying gravity and oxygen levels?
Yeah. Yes, the answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think we obviously can, because I would also say, because right now we're training AI to design on Earth because humans have designed on Earth. In outer space, we haven't. So even though we can predict a lot of things, there would be a lot of things that we might just learn while we're building it. And if AI is a part of our technology, it will learn with us, and it might just compute better solutions.
Well, okay, maybe just to clarify something. I mean, I think what is interesting about AlphaGo is not AlphaGo so much, but the next generation, AlphaGo Zero, because the next system, it played Go against AlphaGo, the original model, and it won 100 games to 0. It thrashed it. It was much better. What's more, it's learned to play Go without actually being taught the rules of Go. That was the significant thing. It didn't learn from humans. It learned by itself through a process of reinforcement learning. And when you realize the capability, of the way in which it was doing that, it was playing, I think, 4.9 million games of Go over 3 days against itself. Now, that just seems like a lot, but when you really think about it, that means 20 games of Go per second. This is a level of operation that we simply can't imagine. So what you're getting is this. It's operating in a kind of in the metaverse, in whatever it is, the computational domain, and it's training itself at a level of speed that we really can't even engage with. And that's what's happening now in terms of architectural designs. They're working out scenarios and not using that same principle of reinforcement learning to teach itself. So Wang Yu's work is all about that, trying to use AI, not learning from humans, but learning from itself and operating at a level that we can't even comprehend. We simply can't imagine. 20 games of Go a second? I mean, I don't know how long a game of Go normally takes, but that's just beyond our capabilities. So, that's the point. It's got beyond simply learning from us, and it's teaching itself.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you also talk about, in the future, it is also at this point we are also training AI as much. So AI is also learning from us and sort of building better things, and that is why people are sort of working on different AI softwares. I would say, because somebody has asked, students will be running to learn AI more, isn't it? And I'm just thinking, should they? Because at the end, once the AI is good enough, won't they be out of a job?
Well, I mean, if you can't beat them, join them. I think yeah. I mean, I think what I would say is that there are also new creativity, shall we say, some of the stuff. I mean, I think I should send you some videos where they were kind of playing around with what you can do with not just simply AI, but using it in conjunction with other things and exploring new territory. So, I think that the point is how do we use that architectural imagination to really think through what we can do, and that's it's engaging with AI, but not just AI, and doing other things. So if we all follow you, Rishabh, we'll be fine because you will be out of the job, right?
Well, all right. Okay, I think we can have our last question for the day because we're already over our time, which is, so what will be a starting point for any noobs to learn about AI? So somebody who has no knowledge of AI prior to this in architecture, what would you recommend would be the best point to start learning about it, and what tools can we look into if we're interested?
Right. So, I mean, first of all, I would say that this summer in Digital Futures, I think we have a series of workshops, and we had 20 last time, and this time we're having them in different languages. 20 on AI. We had over 100 overall. I suspect they're going to be like 30 or so workshops on AI, which are all offered for free, and they're there. There are also a number of these tutorials that have been already uploaded onto the internet. So the information's out there, right? It's not impossible to know. I think what I would say is that things are changing on a really quick basis. So, for example, Clip 2, DALI 2. DALI is a system that's based on GPT-3, which is the most incredible natural language processing system that is so convincing, people are just blown away with it. Now they're kind of like producing images based on this. So it works with text, but then text, you get text and captions. So you can input things like an astronaut on a horse, and if you do that, you'll see it. I mean, and it's absolutely amazing. There are things that are coming out that you think, holy shit, that's what AI did. And so there are systems that are very easy to access like that. At the moment, not fully accessible in the sense that not everyone can use them, but they'll be there on stream pretty soon. And there are all these different systems that use versions of GANs and Clip, which have been used to generate the most amazing things. I think I gave you a video of the futuristic Indian temple, which was done in a 5-day workshop. And you think, that's amazing. And frankly, those who did that workshop, and I know a couple of them, they ended up thinking, they were terrified by the tool. They thought, oh my God, it can do this. And so, I think that the tools are out there. It's just a question of looking for them.
Could you also tell people about Digital Futures, because a lot of my audience doesn't know. And after he also tells about, there are links in the description. You can also check them out.
Yeah. So Digital Futures is an organization that actually started in 2011 in Shanghai when I took a group of students across, and we used to have these physical workshops every year, and we had up to about 900 people coming. It was really popular. Then when the pandemic came, we went online and we decided, okay, we could do this and and we had like 12,000 people sort of signing up for it and so on. And we're continuing. And this year we have another one that's going to start, I think, 25th or 26th of June through to 2nd of July. There are a series of workshops.
And these are all completely free as well.
They're all free. That's something that I think, I taught in Dessau in Germany, where it was almost free anyway. And I discovered that we got these kids coming from places in the world that, like Bangladesh, where they were super talented, and I realized that talent doesn't depend on your ability to pay to go to the AA or Harvard. There's talent everywhere, and I think we have a responsibility to try and share our resources. So that Digital Future is based on that sharing economy and trying to provide the possibility for people in less privileged parts of the world to get access to these ideas. Whenever I host a session, there's one guy who always appears from Baghdad in Iraq, and I think it's great that we're getting the message out there. There's also someone in Kenya who's always logged on and so on. So, this is a system that's been put up there to try and help people, especially for the underprivileged, and trying to bring access to all these ideas to people around the world. So anyway, that's just in its infancy in many ways, but we're gradually building up. And we start off with English. Now we've got different language channels. We've got Portuguese, Spanish, Iraq, Farsi, Arabic, Chinese, Korean, Turkish, and whatever else. And we'll have those over the summer. So we're just developing our website right now. It's going to be called digitalfutures.international, and you will hear more about this. So maybe I can relay some of the information in about a month's time. All those workshops will be open to registration, and I hope we get a lot of Indians joining, frankly. I just want to say that I think India is a country that really is going to benefit from these things. I'm always struck by how computational you guys are, and if Indian architect, but at the same time,
That's
what is
true,
really
yeah.
astonishing, Indian architects are so way behind in terms of computation.
Exactly.
I'm
Like,
just astonished.
there's so much talent within the country, and there's so much. I see so much of the younger generation engaged in learning these new tools, but I do not see it as much in the field. The application of these new tools.
Well, if you go to Silicon Valley, you will hear all these Indian accents all over the place. You'll see people playing cricket and what have you. The Indians are onto it, right? So as soon as Indian architecture gets onto it, then there potentially could be a whole new realm opening up for Indian architects. So I would encourage. I mean, I'm kind of jealous in a way by how smart Indian architects are, and there are already, right? There's a bunch of Indian architects outside of India. I'm thinking people like Shahjeh Bhushan and Zahideen architects who are the leading computational guys. And it's not just them. There was Samir Kashyap, who was in charge of Gary Technologies and so on. So Indians, there's a potentially very rosy future for Indian architects as soon as they can somehow step outside of this old-fashioned mindset where they're worried about feelings and things, and to really engage with a kind of computational systems. Because I'm convinced that this is really something that India could really benefit from. Indian architects in particular.
Yeah. So, I mean, everybody listening, do also check out links in the description below. There are links to Digital Futures. There are also links that lead you back to Neil, where you can contact him and everything. So, do check out those links. And I think with that, we'll also conclude this session of the Blessedarch Lounge. So, thank you everybody for joining in. Thank you so much, Neil, for taking out the time for answering all of our questions today. It was one of the most engaging chats I've had on this channel.
Well, thank you, Rishabh. I just hope that people can find out about these things because the information's out there. It's just a question of being pointed towards it, and let's see what happens. But I've got to say, I think everyone should be thanking you for the service you're doing, because I think you've really seized the opportunity, and you're telling us all, giving us all a lot of lessons, including academics, about how we should be delivering.
Yeah,
material.
I feel like since I'm out of college now, I'm still learning more and more new things each and every day, and it just feels like, in a way, and that is what I do through Blessedarch, is just tell people about these new things in just dramatic ways.
But you should always remain someone ready to be educated. I've seen Rem Koolhaas several times turn up to lectures at the AA. He's hungry for knowledge, right? And I think you always have to be. You don't assume that you've learned everything the world's around, because the world is changing. You have to be able to.
It's the same thing that you were talking about, like the teacher coming in year after year and teaching the same lecture. It's because the world is changing around you year after year. You need to sort of update your information year after year.
Can I finish on one note? I know that there are all these kind of terrifying comments being made, about the death of the architect, but actually, I would rather get across the excitement about what is happening right now, because I think it's a revolution that's going to reinvigorate a lot of people. There are new tools, new ideas, new ways of thinking. It's really, I think it's the most exciting time I've ever experienced in my entire career. What is happening right now, and it's really a provocative moment, which is open to lots of possibilities in the future. So, see the full possibilities. Don't worry about getting faster horses, but try and imagine what might be replacing horses themselves.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Neil. Thank you so much for taking